Welcome everyone to the CLEAN call, video conference call for Tuesday, August 15th, 2023. It's nice to have you all. I'm Katie Boyd, I'm the CLEAN program manager. Our facilitator couldn't join us today, and Gina is out on vacation. So you're stuck with me today. Nice to see you all though. And so the original topic we had put in, we'll get to announcements. I just want to kind of warn people so they can think about what they might want to discuss today. We have an informal discussion. The original topic Gina and I put in the schedule was on evaluation of educational projects, because that's something that I do and can talk to. And we haven't talked a lot about that on the call, so we thought it might be good. And then, yeah, as Jim pointed out on a CLEAN email yesterday, and as many of you may have seen and heard, there was a really important case won by youth in Montana, that they have the right to a healthy environment, and that the state needs to implement consideration of climate impacts and decisions. So that was another topic brought up as possible discussion. I think that's relevant. So that's why I thought we could kind of maybe try to talk about both. Before we get into that though, does anybody have any announcements? Yeah, Jim? Did you raise your hand?
Yeah, sorry for applauding first. That was a mispress. I'm going to, I think, legitimately use the announcement part, but it's also meant to be when we are announcing what I think we can count on being a strong member of the CLEAN network coming in on things. In California, so I'm going to frame it more the latter, but you'll see that this is a legitimate announcement. An organization called the Quest Science Center, which is based in Livermore, California, which is in the East Bay, and there's a number of cities around it. The thing that would be an announcement is something I mentioned before. Is coming up in a couple of weeks is the Livermore Youth Climate Summit, and it's going to be quite an outstanding, very powerful youth summit that goes on. But where the Quest comes in is they will clearly be a very strong member of CLEAN Network. They do many subjects. So for instance, they put on a science festival. Right now they do events with the city of Livermore, but are working toward having a true science museum. They do science education, like they have teachers who are in the schools. They do the summit and things, but they have a very strong part on climate education. And this is the part that I'm excited about, something specifically works for us is we take part in many science festivals in the Bay Area. But usually the science festivals totally rely on us to have anything that's content on climate change. We're it, and then we bring in the CLEAN network and the whole thing. But they're really looking to learn from us and work with us. So, I mean, the whole organization that does it is making climate change, hands-on climate change, very important. And of course, we are, and they're receptive to it. We're saying, like, you really need to be bringing the CLEAN network, the CLEAN resources into when it especially comes to the schools. So you'll be hearing more from them, but I think that's going to strengthen all of us. Thank you.
That's awesome, Jim. Thanks. Yeah, school year starting up. I guess more events are going to be coming, huh? I know a lot of them come in the spring for you too. So, other announcements. Give it a few seconds, see if anybody thinks of anything. I have one though in the meantime. Gina, I think mentioned this last week and then also sent an email about it, but last year we hosted the Excel Summit, which was a really great event. And even if you couldn't be there, I think some conversations were sparked out of that. And we have a report if you're interested in some of the conversations, the stuff that came out of that. And we've been taking that information and thinking about what we can do with Excel going into the future. I think that one of the big things that was discussed in the event and for like the future of climate education community and CLEAN network in general was thinking about like creating kind of small working groups. And so like the big Excel event was really, I think, positive and people enjoyed it, but there was a lot of conversation around like maybe we actually need kind of smaller conversations, more targeted approaches on certain topics that people can engage with. So we've taken that advice and kind of restructured Excel around that. So we're not having like a big event in September like we did last year. And instead, we're going to have sort of a kickoff event in November and then have several months where people can come together and try to, in groups, meet and have conversations, do that kind of collaboration and networking that happened in Excels, but in these smaller groups, and then come back together in the spring and kind of talk about how that went and consider sort of next steps from there. So we have forum right now. We'd love people from the CLEAN community to submit proposals for these groups. So we're going to have 3 this year. And like I said, this is kind of, as last year was another sort of pilot year, trying to figure out if this works well. We have very small amounts, but we do have some funding, $300 per group, so that they can either use that for like their time to organize the group and, think about that, or it could be used towards like if people have ideas towards a project or, collaboration that they want to do coming out of these groups, that money could be used to sort of seed some of that work or what have you. So if you're interested in that, and you don't have to, we actually want to encourage the collaboration that happened and the sort of connections that happened out of Excel last year. So the point is we don't want anybody to just single-handedly propose a group by themselves. Please connect with others, and we want at least 2 people to propose a group. So we have sort of 2 people leading each group at least, and you can have more than that. And then we will help you sort of recruit folks to join your group beyond that. So you don't have to have your whole group together, but at least sort of a few of you to lead it. And then we'd recruit others from CLEAN Network and the Excel community and kind of share that more broadly and widely once we have the groups kind of formed. Like I said, we're just doing 3 this year to kind of see how it goes. And yeah, so if you're interested in talking to some folks from CLEAN or the Excel community about a group, and we can always help you. You can always share emails through CLEAN to have these discussions, even to form the groups, think about what you want to do. And if you need help kind of reaching others from the Excel community that maybe aren't part of CLEAN, Gene and I can help with that, sending emails out. So yeah, if you have any questions about this, especially reach out to Gina, but she's got the next couple weeks, so you can also reach out to me and we'll help you out. But yeah, just wanted to kind of put that out there and let you know that you have about a month or so before these proposals are due. So hopefully some nice ideas can come and people can organize some interesting conversations.
Katie, if you and others don't wouldn't mind a couple minutes or something, maybe we can actually respond a little bit to what you're saying.
Please,
Is that,
yeah.
I don't want to start, but I mean, this is about conversations with us all. Is anybody?
Yeah, and today's informal, so we don't have a strict agenda. So yeah, of course we can discuss it more. Yeah.
I'll say something, but I don't want to be first unless nobody else says anything. Okay.
Any other comments, questions, or concerns?
One thing I like about the CLEAN bunch is, there's nobody is, everybody knows not to hold back. That we're not a bunch that easily gets stepped on. At least I think. So what I want to mention about, I was very pleased by where you went further with what was put in the announcement about the collaborative nature and, kind of if some people put it together and then more coming together. I'm wondering if either, part of one of the discussions we have before the submissions go in, I mean, the proposals go in, that we could really take some more time on questions like what I want to bring up is that there's kind of a group discussion and also hearing from the CLEAN staff over what would be the ideal working groups, right? Maybe if we only have 3, we probably don't want to have a working group on how you bind books or something, some minor detail, right? Um, but we want to make sure there's certain ones. And related to that is, but it's not to dictate ahead of time. I think you're opening it up to what people propose and do things. But there could be a little bit like AGU that say if we get 6, then maybe 2 of them can be combined. And then I have a question of if there's funding for funding 3, does that mean if there was a 4th, 5th, or 6th, and it's not getting too crazy, but they say we can pass on the funding, would that be not a good idea or be a good idea? So anyway, just throwing those things out.
Yeah, these are great questions. And like I said, this is a new process for us. So I don't know that we know all of the answers to that. I think we were a little hesitant to do more than 3 groups just because we weren't sure how many people would submit and how many we would get. And then just also trying to make sure that, there's only, like, we're trying to kind of do this in a 6-month timeline and thinking about, just like how short that actually is and trying not to kind of overwhelm folks with trying, if somebody is interested in all of the groups, like, wanting to join all the groups, that would be a large burden on people's time. But yeah, if people are really interested and don't want funding, I think that's something that we could consider seeing, once we see how many we actually get. I really like the idea of having a conversation about combining things if we get similar proposals, especially kind of like they do at AGU. I think that's a really great point. Let's see, let me put in, this is the link to the evaluation report that we did from the meeting. And I think it's actually in sort of a later, I know evaluation reports are always kind of long to try to put everything in here. Let's see, I think it was in one of the conversations. Yeah, so some of the, I think it's on page 21 in this report. In the last break, I'll just put this in the chat though, so you don't even have to open it. Last breakout session, participants assembled into groups and began collaborating, discussing next steps and some of the topics. Oh, no, this was it. It was the next steps. Specific groups, supporting subgroup meetings and communities of practice. So some of the subgroups that people were interested in were youth and students, DEIA, work, the regional groups. So like, if there's a lot of folks in California or the West Coast or Florida or, Southeast or what have you, informal education and workforce development. So those are some of the topics that came out from that conversation. So let me just put these topics into the chat. And so those were some of the ideas that that's why we were thinking it'd be good to let folks, though, we want these groups to be successful. And so we didn't want to dictate what the groups were, but these were the ideas that Gina tried to put in that announcement that came out of what people were saying. And the reason being that, yeah, we wanted people to have some ideas for what the groups could be, but we also didn't want to dictate because we wanted people who were interested in leading these groups to suggest the topics, right? Because I don't, like, if I say, let's do a group on DIJA work and somebody, nobody ends up being super interested in that, then that group's not going to be successful because nobody's going to really actually lead it and make sure the meetings happen and make sure the conversations happen, if that makes sense. So does that help? And I think those were most of your questions.
Katie, that is entirely characteristic of you, thoroughly and well and concisely responding to things I bring up. I love it.
Good. Any other questions around this call? Or, oh, you can't access that. Interesting. It's supposed to be super open, but of course, I don't know if anybody else has this. Our university, anyways, Google started making people pay for things more than they used to, and our university decided they didn't want to pay for it because they already paid for a bunch of Microsoft stuff. And so we have to use Microsoft OneDrive instead of Google Drive. And it is like the bane of my existence because we make things like as open as possible, and people still can't access them. And I've told them this multiple times, and they're like, if you make it open and accessible by anyone, they're supposed to be able to access it with just the link. So let me put this into a Google Drive. It's just a PDF, so I'll send a different link. Hold on just a second. But yeah, Sarah.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to ask if for these groups, do you have a particular size of group? I'm trying to think about like promoting this within our grantee community because there's a lot of overlap between
Definitely.
what they focus on climate resilience and the work that you guys foster through CLEAN, and some of them are members of both. But before I send this forth, I kind of want to understand if you guys have some kind of ideal structure or size or anything like that. And if not, that's fine. I'm trying to anticipate questions.
Yeah, so again, not something that we have specifically laid out or designed because we kind of want to see what happens with it. We're not sure exactly how many people will be interested in all of those things. In general, I would say groups, that 8 to 10 level is usually about best for really having a conversation and like scheduling meetings. When you get many more than that, it can be hard to. So that's kind of what we were hoping and anticipating, that we'd get something in that level. And that's where, if we get a lot of interest, I think Jim's point about, having more groups, or like even like if for some reason we say, okay, here's 3 groups, and then, we end up getting like, and who might be interested in joining this group, and like 25 people are like, I want to join that group. That's where like maybe we even split that group into 2 focusing on the same topic, but we just have no idea. Like, we've never done this before, so I don't know if we're going to get like 3 people or if we're going to get like 20. But yeah, for me, that's sort of the size I'm thinking about, would be something that people can actually like have decent conversations without having to have like structure a lot of breakout discussions, or having issues with planning with so many people. So
I think you agree with this, Katie, and at least this is my take on it too, is as far as bringing in more people and the number of people, I think it's exactly the type of things that Katie is stressing, of not, maybe like not booking a stadium when we might get 100 people, because then it looks really small. But this is not about exclusion, and I don't think it's any competition. If you were to submit something that was exactly on the topic I submit with 10 other people, nobody's thinking, well, gee, we get to push you out, or vice versa. It's like, no, let's find out how everybody who wants to contribute, who isn't a lurker, or doing everybody who wants to make a positive contribution, we want it all. We want everybody in. So don't feel, in my opinion, don't feel we have to be selective who we bring in or something like that. If they're good, yeah, encourage them. So
okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, I would say generally, yeah, we're at the point of like, encourage folks. We don't know exactly what we'll get, so we'll see once that happens. But I think the more people who have interest and can join us, then we can get a sense of exactly how we're going to structure it. But generally speaking, yeah, I feel like, people have limited time, so people actually really leading this and joining the conversations, like I don't think we'll end up with too many people if we try to share it widely and recruit widely.
And then in terms of the timeline, I'm looking at the form. So it looks to me like you launched this in November this year, and you're wanting these working groups to sort of focus on their work or to be able to have something to report out by spring. So like a 6-month time period or something. So there's a finite period of time when folks would be invested in this, which is probably a good thing, because I think it's harder when you try to set up. We've seen this within our own community of practice for our grantees, where it's longer term, things start and then sometimes they fizzle out, right?
Exactly. Yeah, so we're trying to, last year was Excel's was sort of a literal 2-day summit, which was nice. I think this year we're trying to give more time because of these groups and the conversations, but yeah, we're still trying to make it finite to kind of see what really comes of it, and have an end period where we can figure out next steps and how we want to move forward. I think there's still, like I said, opportunities for these groups to still come together and work and, continue those conversations. But yeah, that we're thinking that 6 months timeline to sort of see what comes of it and have a conversation about then if and how we do move forward after that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions, comments, concerns on Excels? And thanks, Jim. I think that was a really good thing to talk about today. I think it's relevant. Yeah, like I said, we have about a month. We sent this out a week ago. We put September 8th as the deadline for folks, but we'll just see what we get on the 8th, and if we need to extend that, we'll consider that. Like I said, all of this, and we're still trying to just figure it out as we go a little bit. So. Well, if anybody has anything else, interrupt me. Otherwise, I think we could maybe talk a little bit about this youth case that happened yesterday. I thought it was really interesting, and I'm curious other people's thoughts because I think it's a really important thing. From what I read, thanks for putting a link in here, Jim, to an article about it. I had read a New York Times article about it, but that can sometimes have access issues. People at universities tend to get free New York Times. So I'll put that link in too in a minute. But I think my main kind of question here is around the aspects of, it was a really important case in terms of one of the first that scientists really were put on the witness stand and like examined and cross-examined, and a lot of information like really got into the public record about climate change and impacts of climate change, which I think is really important. I'm curious, and there's other cases, as we all know, from youth in this country on climate change and how it's impacting them and their rights. So I think this is relevant to all of those moving forward. But at the same time, Montana very specifically has that clause in their constitution about like a right to a healthy environment. And so that was a very specific part of this case that doesn't necessarily apply in a lot of other cases. So I'm curious kind of that juxtaposition, and if anybody had any thoughts on that. Yeah, Carolyn, you raised your hand.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely like all the optimistic coverage and how much that it's gotten. A little bit concerned that the state really didn't put up much of a defense. I mean, they can't, there really is no defense other than money. But I don't know, I feel like this is going to be appealed to death, and if it gets to the Supreme Court, I have no faith in that institution whatsoever.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's interesting though, because I mean, it can get appealed, but it's very specific again to the Montana Constitution. So can you really have federal ruling on like a state level
They can
interpretation of their constitution like that?
They can overturn 60 years of established precedent. Like I said, I have no faith in the legitimacy of that institution or its adherence to legal principles at this point, which is why I'm concerned.
Okay, so how about very valid points and very concerns? I don't think anybody. I certainly would not argue against those points. Maybe just on the other side of the ledger is, from the good news is, one is these cases, there are hundreds of them, thousands of them, right? And this is the first one that I know of, or at least has gone furthest in breaking through. And if we look at social movements or major controversial issues in society that where the courts are involved, it's not uncommon that there is a lot of just stonewalling and not getting anywhere for a while, and then one breaks through, and then another one breaks through, and this is probably the biggest breakthrough we've seen so far when it comes to the youth on things. I mean, I'm referring to, say, gay marriage or women's right to vote, or so many historic civil rights. Of it takes a lot of different angles and things in breaking it down, and I think That's a strength. I don't want to take away from the very important point. I think Katie is like, what's all the significance of it? I think it's also, once we're looking at these cases coming through, I can tell you that this opens up all kinds of questions about comparing Montana to other places. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to mention what that is. One of the arguments Montana made, and this is in the Washington Post argument, which can be summarized as, we don't need to take action on climate change because, and here's the argument, because no matter what Montana does about climate change, whether it's goes full solar and cuts all of things and so on, well, no matter what we do, climate change will still be climate change. We won't appreciably affect it. So he basically is, we don't do anything because if we're the only ones who do anything, then it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if you vote or things, which is a crazy, which is the argument of like, well, nobody does anything because everybody else says my thing won't make a difference. Well, what I want to bring up is Montana's like a red state, generally considered that, and one of the places you'd think, okay, I could see them making that argument. But the city I live in, Oakland, California, known as one of the most progressive cities in the country, that's had climate action plans for 14 years now, they have been making that same argument internally all that time. They have an external climate action plan, but the internal policy among city officials is whatever Oakland does about climate change, whether it be trees or electric vehicles or whatever, it will not change what climate change does. Therefore, we do not take climate change into a consideration in the decisions the city of Oakland makes. So there's this external public policy, but the real one is, since what we do doesn't change climate change, it doesn't matter what we do, so we're not going to do anything. And I think this starts to bring out these really hidden arguments. And then you can say, so you're siding with the state of Montana against children? That's one thing we're talking about in Oakland right now. Our progressive city is taking the side on Montana against children. Okay, maybe that mayor ought to go now if you aren't going to step up and say something about that. So a lot of stuff opens once the water starts to come out of the dam.
Interesting, yeah. Carrie?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to what Carolyn was worried about regarding the Supreme Court, and the only way that they would be able to make any kind of commentary on it is if it incorporated some aspect of federal law, which to my understanding it doesn't. I can totally understand the concern that they've overstepped boundaries, very recently. But hopefully this is one boundary, that there isn't an aspect of federal law in this particular case that they won't overstep.
Yeah, Sarah.
In response to something that Jim was saying, that argument about we're small and what kind of impact are we going to have, which I think is easy and it's a cop out, but I understand why people think that way. And that was something that we heard from our grantees actually in Maine when we first started funding climate resilience work up there. And they were sort of like, well, we can focus on adaptation measures, but I don't know, what's the state of Maine going to be able to do? And because we're such a low population state, anything we do is not really going to have an impact in terms of mitigation. And they're no longer saying that, right? Like they are doing both, and they're promoting both in the communities that they reach out to when they talk about sea level rise. But it does seem to be like a natural, as you were saying, like a natural way for people to go. And it just, you gotta work with them to see, like, we gotta start making changes somewhere soon.
Yeah, I actually thought it was interesting that in this case they made that argument, and it wasn't like thrown out or anything, but they basically like decided that was not a good argument here, that Montana did have, enough impact to matter. Yeah, Frank.
So interesting conversation. One consideration here related to this, like, it won't make a difference argument is there's another consideration, and I think there's a lot of chatter in other parts of the climate community talking about this, that the reason we're not telling people not to do things, but it's more like, let's be really clear about the actions and the benefits of those actions. So in Maine specifically, is there an advantage to them having offshore wind, independent of everything, right? And the same thing as Massachusetts, right? Their analysis is absolutely grows the economy, grows jobs, and gives them environmental benefits. So the triple bottom line argument. I don't know if the stopping doing stuff, like don't use fossil fuels, isn't the most compelling argument. It's definitely an action. But what we're starting to see more often is, well, if we don't do that, what do we do? And the answer to that isn't always clear. And in doing that, is it better than what we are doing right now? So there's just like this weird thing where we talk about what not to do too much. We don't talk about what to do and what would be better because we've done it than what we currently are doing right now. There's just a flip. And it's an interesting flip because I think it opens the door to much more action, as opposed to I'll only do it if you do it and you'll only do it if I do it. Well, both of us aren't doing anything. Well, that's a very easy way to not do anything. Anyway, it's a super tricky question because it gets down to human motivation and political benefits and who's tricking the system which way. I don't know if that helps. I mean, obviously the Montana court case is very pivotal. One of these days, one of these court cases is going to win. It's going to go all the way, and it's going to open the floodgates. It's just, you never know which one it's going to be. I think Jim, that was to your point, right? They keep on pushing, and one of them is going to win. But if you don't push it, none of them win.
Yeah, I'm also curious. I don't know if anybody's followed any of the court cases internationally, and I know those don't affect here, but like I just wonder if some of that like philosophy can be brought in. There was something in like the Netherlands, and that was kind of similar to this on like rights and climate impacts. And then there's been a few elsewhere. I know one in like New Zealand or Australia, on like the rights of was it rivers or bodies of water or something like that. And I know those don't directly like affect the like law here, and I'm not a law person, so I don't know exactly. But I'm just curious if like sometimes those ideas get used in some of these cases around here. Does anyone know anything about that aspect of it? It's okay if not, I'm just curious. Jimmy, you can talk to that or something else.
I can, but again, I really don't like to talk when somebody else might want to talk. So if nobody says anything, I'll say something. But please, no. Let's give some time to respond to your point, Katie.
Katie, I mean, the law is being used all over the world to deal with climate in a whole host of ways, by indigenous nations, by NGOs, but it really depends on what they're trying to get done. And but I definitely think that the law is part of the tool set that's being used. There are laws that are being, that are, I think the UK right now, there's a big legal push because their commitment to climate education isn't following through the way they thought it should. And so if I remember right, but it depends on whether it's about carbon reductions, about resilience, about rights and treaties. If it's, it's definitely an incredibly active space, but I don't know of anybody who's got a good handle on that for us as a community. Like there was a guy out of Long Island that used to spend a lot of time on climate law, but he's not in the Clean Network actively anymore. I'm trying to remember his name. Anyway, that's all I got. Sorry.
No, thanks, Greg. That's helpful. Jim, I think you can go ahead. No one else has raised their hand, so.
So I think maybe just to make sure we're planting this obvious point, but it's central to us and it's also central to us as educators, is the power that young people have and the way it changes the discussion and it changes the controversy. Young people have a power to be uplifting and inspiring that older people don't. And we're seeing that. And that's a lot of the power of these, the whole idea of a lot of these lawsuits and so on, is young people are saying, you know, we have a future, we have a voice, we cannot be treated as we have no rights at all. And I think it naturally dovetails with it. I think one of the excellent points you make, Frank, is, you know, it's more the positive nature of what we can do rather than, you know, stopping. It's what we're doing, you know, that we're keeping young people from building their own future, from creating their own future. We're restricting them to stay the way it was, when that is taking away their future, right? And it's making the flat out argument of like, yeah, so you have some 80-year-old senator from some country who's going to be alive, if he's lucky, 20 more years, who doesn't really care about what's going to happen to his home and things. Like, he's going to live, he's got air conditioning, he's got all these things, and he doesn't live on the coast, you know, all these different things. But hey, we've got a whole lifetime here ahead, and we you know, we're going to be around for our grandchildren and our nephews and nieces and all that stuff. I mean, that's a very powerful thing. This flows then into perhaps the other obvious point is, you know, we rightly are the defenders or the flag bearers or whatever. I mean, we as as a group here need to be making the strength of the importance of climate literacy and the climate of education, right? It gets lost. It gets pushed aside as, well, that's not the same as policy. That's not the same as you know, innovation. It's not the same as what a corporation is doing and thinks, oh, what's education? What, you know, that's just a bunch of kids and that's for the future. And those are teachers, and who cares about teachers anyway? Well, take a look at what young people can do, and then what of government or what of corporations or whatever. I mean, education and kids always go together. They always go together. I mean, they're, you know, I tend to call our young people students half the time, right? I mean, young people, students, young men and women, young people, non-binary people and things. But I don't tend to kill them once they're after middle school. I don't call them kids very often, but they're students. And that's where they spend most of their time. So I guess what I'm just saying is I think we have let me put it this way. I think we have a duty to see the relevance of this and speak of this, because we're basically being called to the microphone to be among the speakers of like, yeah, and this is why CLEAN is so important. This is why education is so important. Because look at the power the young people are having. And we have to stand with them. We have to support them. I mean, I recognize different parts of government, different things, you know, what we advocate and don't advocate. But I don't know if it really should be controversial in government. Do young people have a right? Do the people we serve, young people, do they matter? I don't think that should be, you know, I think go ahead and let any part of government say, well, that's actually controversial. I think it's just old people that matter. Go ahead, say that, and let's take that out into the forefront, and let's take that public and say, I don't think you should belong in the government if that's what your attitude is. Or, you know, something, at least, you know, some pushback on that. Now, again, but take it more positive rather than say you shouldn't be in government. It's like, well, the young people should be in government, or the young people. I mean, it just, I mean, I think it gets to the whole feeling of what CLEAN is about, CLEAN Network is about, is we care about young people and their future. We're here. Why are we here? Why are we here?
But I think, Jim, one quick response is that I think often there's a false trade-off that's discussed in these conversations. Like, if it wasn't for the economy, it's like, it's really unfortunate fossil fuels are, you know, we're so dependent on them. They're really important to the economy, and so I guess we're just going to have to use them. And so there's like a false trade there, and it's like, well, the future, we'll have to sacrifice a little bit of the future in order to have a better present. And you know, that's an incomplete and morally bankrupt argument, but it passes. And I think that, you know, having a more complete conversation about, and it turns out actually we don't need to do that. That's not a real trade-off. It's actually a more expensive way to do things in many, 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 many ways. So, but I definitely think there's an incompleteness to a lot of the chatter. I see it in, I just got back from vacation with family, and they'll just make a quick statement, and I'm like, it's almost like, you know, oh, but yeah, we got to leave those fossil fuels in your investment portfolio because they perform really well. I'm like, there's a problem there.
Well, Frank, how about this one of you know, not the response to that, but among our repertoire. I mean, this is science-based stuff, so this isn't a political thing to say. Is because there's different people I work with who will say different things. Like the school, low school, they tend to say keep fossil fuels in the ground, right? That's a message that this school goes with. Okay, I mean, I can work with that, and it's fine, but I don't quite actually believe in that. This is what I believe. If you look at the field of view of everybody, what we're looking at each other, everything you're doing, there is nothing you are looking at right now that was not made with petroleum. The glass, the plastic, your eyeglasses, the light bulb behind you, Frank, carry the blueness that makes your background, that blurs your background, Katie, your watch, Katie. These are all made with fossil fuels. Are they going to be around in 10, 20, 30, 50 years for other generations, for the rest of what America is about and what the world is about? No, we've burned them all. We've burned them all. I mean, I'm just saying the thing of the long-term, short-term, multi-generational, which is, of course, one of the fundamental learning points we have from Indigenous knowledge is we should not think just what the next cycle of 30 years of stock should be. We should be thinking about generations ahead. I mean, all these issues kind of come up here, but I think they come up more clearly when it's young people bringing this up, saying, "What about our future? Does that count at all?" So, I mean, does that, just, I mean, there's so many things that come to bear. So please, I'm certainly not saying that's the response, right? But maybe I guess that one of, hey, I think our climate education people and things like that should include more are we saying that the fossil fuel, that petroleum has no purpose, there is no function, that we should never use it? We're not saying that. At least some of us aren't saying that, but burning it is ridiculous. There's ways to make energy without burning things. And we have to work on the other technology, but there's a lot of medicine we have no way to do without petroleum. There is plastic. You can't do plastic without petroleum. Maybe you can get around it with coal, but you can't do that with, it has a purpose, but burning it is ridiculous. So it's also the students need this knowledge, right? They need us to help bring them wisdom and knowledge, because kids don't inherently just know this stuff, right? They don't have an argument for, are you saying that everybody who's a petroleum worker should be fired and go home? No. But why should we burn all their products? Exxon, you've got a very important product. Why should we burn your important product?
Because they make a lot of money in it. That's why. They make a lot of money burning fossil fuels, right? So I think let me just throw something a little edgy at you guys. So I've worked in the climate and global change enterprise in the US government for 28 years. And there's it's about $3 billion annual budget across 14 departments and agencies of the US government. It's the largest enterprise of climate and global change research in the world. Name me the climate solution enterprise. Where is the climate solution enterprise to match and rival the climate and global change enterprise? Because Jim, even as we're having this internal conversation, how do we know which solutions work? How do we know which things actually could do what things that are actually keep the carbon load in the atmosphere within the science-based evidence targets that the IPCC and others carry, right? Which ones work? I mean, we have Project Drawdown, but that's not a governmental entity. right? It's an NGO and it's great, but it doesn't have the same heft of, but right, I mean, I'm showing my cards face up, right? Is like, I'm on the problem, identify the problem side of the business, but I'm struggling to find who identifies the solutions and helps deploy solutions. We don't have that agency. I mean, Department of Energy and EPA have parts of it, sort of, but they have other stuff to do. So there seems to be, I've just come to this conclusion in my vacation last week that we are missing a part of the government. And whether it's state government or county government, city government, national government, I don't care. But I definitely see a gap. And this got really acute under the Obama administration, where a lot of that was done at the White House. So it's very ephemeral. The White House is an ephemeral entity. It comes and it goes. This is not come and go work. So I don't know. Does that resonate with you all? Because it's driving me batty.
Okay, it does, Frank. What I want to give you, and for everybody else, is maybe get their feedback. So it's not just I don't want to just make it you and me talking. Is Frank, I want to offer you an arrow in your quiver. I want your quiver to have 20 arrows in it, and then metaphorically, right? You have ammunition and your points and your persuasiveness, and you've got 20 quivers at home. So like when you use one up, you have another one. But I'm just saying, one of your arrows in your quiver. We are the people I work with, Mobile Climate Science Labs, Climate Club DC, we are very systematically working on that problem for you, Frank. Okay, for you or for your people, right? And we're coming at it in a lot of different ways. Here's one, if you don't mind. So this is educators helping government get moving and to do things. Okay. One of the things you rightly brought up a week or two ago, which is a good one, is, and tell me if I'm off on paraphrasing some of it, is that the different government agencies, NOAA or even Department of Energy, but some of them would say, but we don't have from Congress right now funding to say we are supposed to take these actions or we're supposed to teach about these actions. There's nothing in the Congress that says we should do this yet, right? Valid point. So we're working on that from a couple different directions. One is, yeah, but Congress actually, or the government already has this, because if you're saying, if we're saying there's not money to spend to do this, it is understood that government should not waste money. That if we have a budget and we are deliberately wasting money, wasting the taxpayer money, wasting our budget when we don't have to, it's our duty to do something about it. You don't need a special law about that. So when we're pointing out the offices of the government, which are throwing money down the drain on incandescent light bulbs, when for a little bit of an investment, they can pay that back in a year and be making money and saving money, they should do that. So when we go, first we this Smithsonian, we've already won them over. They're getting it, that our students are coming to them and helping them save money. And that was one of the arguments we got from the directors of the Natural History Museum. If we don't have the money to save the money. But then when they sat about it and looked at it and they went around, and one thing we came back and says, we're taking that argument to the Department of Energy, bringing up, look, all the federal agencies have mandates to save energy, to go to LEDs. You're not doing that, and you're using the excuse that there's no money to do it, even though the operations part has the money. Well, when they sat and they said, look, these students are not going to let us go on this, in a friendly way, they're going public with our argument. And sure enough, all they're kicking and screaming, we went back and they changed all the light bulbs already. They found the way to do it. So do you see what I'm saying? We've noticed your concern. And, I teach my students to look for the good in the federal government and work with it, work with the laws, treat people as your allies. They've got a problem. Let's help them solve it. Let's help them. Let's go with the saving the money argument so we can to get past we don't have the money.
Yeah,
Well,
saving
that's
money.
because you're wasting money.
Well, saving money is one of the best arguments you make for people on climate change. But Frank, to your point, I also would argue, I think you're right. I think that the level of funding for the solutions is nowhere near the other research, but I do think it's mixed in. And, like just for example, the funding for the ecology program that I was in graduate school, like a lot of that came through, FDA or those kinds of like the agricultural funding sources for research on like, and they were looking at like what makes crops more resilient, how do you create more regenerative agriculture? Does that actually help keep carbon in the ground, like, et cetera? So I would say that the solutions funding is somewhat mixed in with some of the other funding too. Even at, like you're saying, local, state, county level, even at that level, like Boulder had this huge debate a while back about like this area that they were setting aside for like flood mitigation and like building building these structures to mitigate floods in that area. And it was like, oh, do we plan for the 100-year flood or the 500-year flood? And there was like a huge debate, and like people had petitions and stuff like that. That's people at the city level looking at which is better. And it's like, well, obviously the 500-year is better, but it also costs a lot more, right? And so like there's your trade-off. How do you decide that? So I think it's there. I think you're right that it's not at the same level, but I'm just like making the argument that I do think it is there.
Yeah.
Going to be a
Katie,
little-
I love that you brought that up, because that's exactly what I was going to say, that of course, all these different departments have their own way of addressing climate change and be climate change solutions oriented. The USDA, the DOE, FDA, all of them. So I'm wondering what kind of collaboration and budget sharing that they could do, and how can that be suggested to them? Like, where is their opportunity for that collaboration? Because I'm sure there are multiple entities working on the same thing, but just disjointed.
Yeah, Frank's working on it. Frank's trying to get DOE.
Yeah,
For
working
years
on
now.
it, and there is a move at the federal level to create a new architecture of coordination on climate services. And I just put the link to the White House report, and I know who's leading it, and I was on this writing team. But it's going to take an act of Congress for this to actually, because the Global Change Act of 1990 kind of hints at this, but it didn't work towards what we need now. So there's really a missing law. Jim, I got you. I'm right. I hear what you're saying, but the law actually changes bureaucratic architectures and funding and coordination. That is not like I'm trying to find one person in the Department of Energy. No. It needs to be like, this is what we as an entity are doing, plus, and then look at gaps. There's so much coordination in the federal government right now. It's crazy, but it's still on top of. It's not the core thing we do. So it'll be interesting to see how I just think, when we think, do we have the education system we need to deal with climate change? The answer is a solid no. Do we have the federal government we need to solve climate change? I think I've come to the solid conclusion. The answer is no. What's different and what's needed, what's missing? That's important stuff to know. But how we get there between now and then, and while we're flying the plane, that's a task before us. I feel like I'm flying through the air and all the parts are around me, and
And Frank, if I could challenge,
put the plane
We're all
together
there with you, Frank.
if I could
before they
challenge,
hit the ground.
I'd like to challenge government, and you're just the person I'm speaking to. I know I'm not making a first person challenge, but
Sure.
Speaking on behalf of the students I work with, I'm their mentor, but they go for this. They love this. Is in these things, for example, and this is generally like this is linking up with the students in Montana, is the young people are going ahead and making some things happen and coming to government with, we have solutions to work with you and do things, but we need to ask you, in fact, demand of you, you need to treat us with respect. I'm speaking the thing, you need to say that we're worth listening to. Just because we're young or we're young Black women, get over it. You got to talk with us, because if we're helping you save money, if we're helping you do these major things, you start to see we're giving you a way to get into taking climate action. It might be small, I mean, but because this group here is not a bunch of lobbyists, we can't go and lobby Congress with $10 billion to go do this, but we can do it. We can eat away at it and do things. That's what educators can do. We work with young people. So for an example, again, strategically chosen, and I'm not trying to toot our horn, our little horn here, but just an example of what we as educators can do. Our students go into the U.S. Capitol, find out where the U.S. Capitol is wasting energy, then go to the architect of the Capitol and point to them where they still have incandescent lights, and they change those. And we make the point. So you have middle and high school students making the U.S. Capitol building more energy efficient, reducing its carbon footprint, and all the senators and all the congressmen, they can't do that. Look at what the young people are doing, saving the taxpayer money when you're sitting on your butts and yelling at each other all the time, because that's what your lobbyists are getting you to do, you know, all this type of stuff. But it's kind of saying to government is work with these young people. They are part of your salvation.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim.
Ignore them, and we're gonna embarrass you. We're going to embarrass you, not you personally, Frank, and not Noah personally, but we're going to point out the parts of the government that are standing with us, like the Smithsonian and the DOE, and kind of say, where the hell is NASA?
Yeah, I think that's
Sure.
what a lot of us are doing in climate education work, is trying to make progress and push for action, push for change, get young people to push for those policy changes and make those changes. I just want to acknowledge we are at time today. So thanks everyone. This was a really great conversation today. I really appreciate everybody joining. And if you want to stay on and talk a little bit more, you can. I'm going to stop the recording and I have to go, but I can make someone else host. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Katie. And Jim, check out this link I sent you. See what you think about that.
Bye, everyone.